Well, the plan of instituting higher tariffs by the White House has been designed, as they say, to raise revenue that can help out the U.S. economy in other areas. But there are potential negative impacts to things like GDP and wages. Ken Smetters is faculty director of the Penn Wharton Budget Model. They have come out with a new paper looking at that side of the tariff story, and he joins us right now. Kent, great to talk to you. How are you, sir?
Good to be here. Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, this is obviously a very important part of the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like it's one that's maybe not getting as much attention right now.
Right. I mean, part of the issue is that a lot of the analysis that's being done is really kind of using fairly simple trade models that really are not capturing kind of the full impact of tariffs on the rest of the economy. In particular, there's a whole capital flows part of the economy as trade falls, capital flows typically will fall as well, and that means foreigners are buying less of government debt, and so in particular, it's not just that we are buying more goods and services of foreigners and they're buying from us. That's known as the trade imbalance that everybody likes to focus on. It's what really drives that is government debt in the United States is quite large. And what happens is that foreigners typically borrow, or are the lenders, I mean, to the federal government. And that creates a demand for the dollar. It makes the dollar stronger. That makes our trade of goods and services look less competitive because they become more expensive. And so what happens when you try to reverse that just by trying to tackle the trade deficit, what you're also doing is you're going to limit how much of capital flows come into the United States as well. And so, in effect, that is going to make it just harder for the government going forward to float its federal debt at kind of a cheap, at essentially higher prices, but a cheaper interest rate. And so, given that we're on this explosive path of federal debt, it's just going to make the federal government hard. It's going to make it harder for the federal government to continue work this debt policy that we're on. And so it's that capital flows are currently being missed.
So take us through the GDP and the wages component that could be impacted here.
Yes, and it's not going to certainly happen immediately in terms of the full impact, but it's not small. In particular, in over the next 5 years, we're expecting that the economy, relative to not having the tariffs, would shrink by about 1.1%. So the GDP still continues to grow with population, technology, and so forth, but relative to where otherwise would be by 2030, we project that it'll be about 1.1%, a little bit lower. That is not necessarily terribly surprising. Some of the trade models will get up to there, but then they don't really distinguish between times. They're just all stating that as a longer period outcome. But the problem is as you go down the line, in particular, as you go further years from now, 2034, 2039, and so forth, the impact becomes bigger and bigger. And in particular, we're predicting by 2054, roughly around roughly around 30 years from now, that GDP will be about 7.5% less, that's 7.5% less, maybe 8% less, depending on some assumptions in our model. And as the result of that is that we're talking about significant reduction in GDP relative to, say, other policies. One way of thinking about this, and by the way, wages will fall by over 6% over time. Again, by 2030, we're talking about 1% reduction of wages relative to where they otherwise would have been. By over time, the wages will fall even more. So there'll still be wage growth per se, but we're not going to have the same wage growth. It will be lower than where we otherwise would have been. So I think it's one of those issues that, say, okay, if this is that distorting, what are some alternatives? What else could we have done? And so we basically say, let's look at what's kind of like the most distorting way of raising revenue. And that basically would be to increase the corporate income tax alone, nothing else. I mean, you might believe in that for progressivity reasons, but it's in terms of economic damage by far the most distorting. And so this is equivalent in terms of revenue of raising the corporate income tax from 21 to 36%. But in terms of economic damage, it's actually twice as damaging as that increase in the corporate rate.
You mentioned about the impact on wages. Just how much does the consumer bear the brunt on these tariffs? And I guess there is this report looks at it over like a 30-year window, that there is some difference in terms of what impact will be now in comparison to what we might see 30 years ago, and that can impact people of different ages in different ways.
That's right. So in the short run, uh, the main mechanism that drives things for the first couple of years is actually just the uncertainty. That's been well quantified now in the economics literature. Is increase in uncertainty lowers investment. So we're projecting that this increased uncertainty is going to lower investment by about 4.5% over a year or two. So that's a pretty significant drop. Now, obviously, if the uncertainty gets resolved fairly soon, that will change. But for now, it's a fairly significant short run effect. But that we projected that uncertainty itself kind of wears off by 2027 ish. That might be optimistic. But what could actually happen are things that are not captured by our model. In particular, we're capturing a lot of things that haven't been captured, but there's still a lot of things in the short run. The way I describe short run versus long run in these trade models is that, use a physics analogy. You have classical physics and then you have quantum physics, which is really the superset of all, of classic physics plus more. In the short run, the entanglement between society, between economies is so complex. Nobody understands, nobody has a good model of it just because the proprietary data, data sets that we even have access to, they don't have a lot of descriptions. For example, we don't know, you have a business in the United States. It may use 30 different parts, or a car, 30,000 different parts for lots of different places. And just one of those parts being disrupted could actually lead to you just not being able to produce. Now, eventually, you might say, well, all that production will come back to the United States. And we actually assume a lot of that will happen, and we even assume a lot of that will happen very smoothly. But even with that, you just have this lower demand for government debt, and that drives up. That just makes things a lot more challenging because now all the investment in the United States can't depend on foreign dollars as much anymore. And as a result of that, that's going to make just our government debt path even more challenging.
Kent, great to have you with us. Thanks very much for your time. For those that want to see the report, they can go to the Penn Wharton Budget Model website. Thanks, Kent.
Thank you.
Kent Smetters, who is faculty director of the Penn Wharton Budget Model.